You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. This is Beast Over Burden. I'm your host, Nikki. With me is Andrew.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So everybody knows it's old news now that you're just hitting PRs all over the place. Nope.
No, that
Different now.
that stopped. Yep. The usual summer schedule change came up, and historically we've had a good run through the spring and kind of into the early summer. And I think that might have been what happened. And then I went for a camping trip kind of mid-June, and I guess I did squeeze out a bench PR, and bench is still right up there, kind of close to PR, but squat and deadlift seem to have definitely taken a hit.
It's really interesting to me, and I think this is definitely more advanced, how one lift or two lifts can just like totally die and another lift can keep going. And it makes you wonder, like, because, you know, when that happens on a squat, you're like, well, clearly I'm globally not recovering and I'm not getting strong. But then your other lift keeps going really well. And that's always kind of a mind game for me. It's like, okay, well, how did this stop working so significantly, or maybe just not even that much significantly? And then the other one just keeps cruising. Have you noticed that sometimes?
Yeah, I don't know if it's that one. I mean, I've definitely noticed that before. First of all, usually the stereotypical one is that the press is going to be the first to really tank. And then I've always thought of the press as sort of the canary in the coal mine in terms of that type of thing. I don't know if this one is as much as two lifts are tanking and one keeps going as much as it is a matter of percentage fluctuation, because I don't know, my bench top end might not be doing well either. I just haven't tested it this week yet, but 5-10% on a bench doesn't feel as much as 5-10% on a squat. And even the squat yesterday that didn't go super quote unquote great for me was still at like 95% of where I have been, which were near lifetime PRs. So
that's a helpful thing to look at.
It just doesn't feel as good. It's weight that's 10, 25 pounds less than it was a couple of weeks back. And it's really hard. Whereas even when I was squatting 405 high bar for 3x5, it was heavy and very doable. Whereas this week it feels really heavy and barely doable at less weight. So I think psychologically it feels harder than anything at this point.
Yeah.
And the directional change is also just challenging mentally, because, when you go 2-3 months in a row where you're just gradually adding a little bit of weight and things just keep going up, and then it feels like it's going the other direction, that suddenly feels like, is something wrong with the program? Do I need to start doing a bunch of things different, or do I just ride this out and take into account the fact that I'm not sleeping as well, nutrition hasn't been as good, training consistency is all over the place. I mean, there's just like a million variables going on right now. So it's less fun, but I'm trying not to get too worried about it or overthink it at this point.
Well, that is actually an interesting kind of tangent to what I was wanting to talk to you about today. It was like, is this something that I need to write out, or do I need to change some things? And because this is definitely something that happens with a lot of lifters. It's happened with me. It's like, you just went down a really helpful list there of like, well, let me look through all these things. And, is there like a certain amount that you're like, well, these circumstances are all the same, which means I just need to carry on, or these are all different, which means I need to change everything. What is that process like for you? You went through sleep, nutrition, you travel a lot. Yeah. What's that checklist for you again?
Well, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, my mental model is that recovery is the bottleneck.
Yeah.
Your lifting stress, applied stress, can do all kinds of different things, but the gatekeeper of whether that's going to translate into productive adaptation, in my mind, is predominantly based on recovery. And so my checklist is to to go down the list of really the top 4, maybe 5 things that directly influence that. How well am I sleeping? How well have I been eating? Subsets of that might be how much alcohol are contributing to my calories or not.
We all know alcohol's fine. There are no problems with alcohol, especially Aperol Spritz.
How much protein is in my calories. Because what I've noticed is that when, especially over the summer or during the fall, I've also noticed it kind of creep up when watching football or something like that. When beer starts becoming more of my diet,
A macro. Yeah.
then I'll tend to just kind of intuitively start eating less of other things
Yeah.
because I feel full faster, or I just kind of know I'm getting a lot more calories in from non-food sources. And so my body composition and my body weight I think I've built sort of like a internal calibration where I normalize around the same body weight, but how I get there starts becoming way less advantageous for recovery.
Yeah. Not a performance body weight
No.
as much.
Yeah. Or just calories, like the type of calories are, not as much protein and a higher contribution from alcohol just
Yeah.
does not go well.
And of course, I think that's a big one for all of us during the summertime. I've definitely had a lot of conversations recently with my nutrition clients and then, internal dialogue. That's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not like I'm, getting crazy with it. It's just that's one of the first things I check in with that I'll notice. It just sort of like sneaks up, creeps up. There's more occasions for there to be some drinks. And I think that adds up over time. So that's kind of the mental check that I'll do there. I find that travel, just because have a fair amount of travel, or maybe it should be really more about the routine. That's one of the things I would say is probably more generically applicable to everyone is how much is my routine changing? Do I even have a routine right now? And right now I don't have much of a routine. I've been in 3 different states over the last 2 weeks, and sleeping in different places, traveling a lot, and bedtime, wake up time, work routine. The schedule's just kind of all over the place. I've been doing more spin classes for the last couple of weeks. Went for a run with Clara this afternoon. And so all of these things compared to what I was doing when everything was going gangbusters was significantly different. I'd say those are the first things. And that's what I ask my clients as well. If they hit a sticking point or things start turning in a different direction, I start asking those questions. The fifth one I would say is just stress in general. Like sometimes there's a factor in your life that isn't nutrition or sleep or schedule related. It could be some sort of relationship issue. It could be something at work. It could be a deadline approaching. I just had a client who pulled an all-nighter getting ready for a court case the next day.
Oof. Yikes.
And he's not normally a trial lawyer. He's normally more on the admin or like the kind of the office side of the house. So for him, that was a big spike of stress in his life that we're having to manage the program around that. So those are the 5 things that I would go through first to make sure you're putting your performance in the context of your ability to recover.
Yeah.
Do you have a list?
No, it's definitely that. The recovery factors. And I think sometimes people will want a change in their program when really what might be necessary is a change in everything that you just listed in the circumstances around outside of the program. And I think it'd be interesting to talk about, like, if someone is asking for more conditioning, if someone is asking for more hypertrophy work to lean out, like, is it a change in your circumstances or is it a change in your program? And if it is a change in your program, what are the minimum effective doses that you take to actually take action towards what you want? So, for example, I think that would come up for me is like, well, the nutrition one's really big where someone realizes, I have no idea what my protein consumption is, and I think I'm drinking too much.
Right.
What are the most actionable and effective steps to take to start feeling better and making concrete steps, taking steps in concrete, whatever.
I think the most important first step is noticing. That is surprisingly harder than most people may think. This is going to sound ridiculous, but somewhat related, that at some point in my professional past, I had this part of my day where I had to do these factory walkthroughs. And we would go through every single step of the manufacturing process and review the performance of that particular area. And a lot of it involved looking at things that weren't performing to plan. And if there was a gap to plan, then we had to dig into problem solving. And it was like the stand up with everybody on the team walking around the factory. I've probably talked about this a bunch of times. At some point along the line, I realized that I was clenching my butt like super hard. And I would get done with these walks at the end of the day and my back would hurt and like I would just be completely exhausted. And I remember talking to this like physical therapist, and somehow or another this came up. And he was like, well, first step is noticing. And it's because I was like, I just can't stop it. Like, how am I supposed to stop this? And he's like, well, just start paying attention and notice when it's happening and then try to relax. And the first step of noticing is often the hardest, because a lot of the behavior patterns throughout your life, I mean, clenching your butt, that's one, but the things you eat, what time you go to bed, what time you get up, how much beer you're drinking, like a lot of these things are just sort of like things you do that you don't even notice that you're doing. The handful of snacks that you grab at the end of the day, like I've talked about this in the past, that I used to have like 5 different types of nuts on the counter and like mason jars full of nuts. And I just come home and that was my snack for whatever reason. I didn't even really pay attention to the fact that that's what I was doing. There's different ways you can do that. I think this is actually where weighing and measuring becomes so effective for most people, is that it forces you to pay attention to what you're actually eating in a measurable way. And simply by measuring, most people eat less or eat different because they notice that, well, I would have normally eaten 10 cheese sticks right now, but I only want to put 1 down. So,
Right. Yeah. Or just like the added step of putting your bowl on the scale and then scooping ice cream into it.
right.
And then the additional added step of entering it is enough to maybe even change that whole behavior.
Right. Yeah. And like a common strategy that Brittany will have her clients do is, if you're going to snack, just put it in the bowl.
Yeah.
You don't have to eat less, just put it in the bowl. But by putting it in the bowl, that alone will change the process, because to put more in the bowl, you'll notice, or you'll at least have to make some level of conscious decision to put more in the bowl. So it's just small things that interrupt the pattern to help you notice.
Yeah, it's like you add some friction around certain things,
Right.
and then remove friction around other things.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. I think the other like low hanging fruit with that one is doing the pantry audit and pulling things out. I know this probably sounds like some sort of like nightmare scenario for you to pull all the things out of the pantry. But I mean, that didn't come across very well.
I've done that and I don't mind. I
Well,
have
but if-
no guilt associated with my snack foods.
I know you don't personally. I was saying, like, if somebody really wanted to make a radical change, like literally pull everything out of their pantry that they wouldn't want to have as a snack. Obviously, you personally don't need to go down this rabbit hole.
You know whose pantry I would want to see that happen to is Matt Reynolds.
That would also probably be a nightmare scenario.
You have to like step over chips to like get to cookies in there. It's like it's a snacky person's dream.
It is definitely a wonderful pantry.
It is.
But, a lot of people can work around that. The idea there is that it's a strategy to add friction to the process. Like the lowest hanging fruit is to not have it. And it was the same for me. Like, oh, if I simply take the 5 mason jar of nuts off the counter,
Yeah.
then suddenly I eat 800 calories less per day.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have to it wasn't painful for me to do that. It's just that it removed that, or it added enough friction that I had to, in order to actually eat that, make the conscious decision to either go to a different part of the house to be able to get it, or pantry, or go to the store and get more. So yeah, I certainly agree, for things that you want to stop doing, adding friction. The alcohol one is probably the best example for me personally, is like just not having that in the fridge. That's probably reduces the probability that I'm going to have a beer at the end of the day by 99%.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a lot of the most common things that we see. I want to make this super applicable for someone. So when someone is frustrated with how they're feeling, looking, and they know it's nutrition based, like the low hanging things that typically are addressed are, like you've just said, snacking, alcohol, and I would say not eating regular meals throughout the day are like the three most common ones. And so if you're ready to take action, what you just said, what Andrew just said is maybe you don't know the things that are having a really high caloric impact, which would be alcohol, high fat content items like fatty meat, nuts, peanut butter, things that you just kind of grab and go, or a handful here, a handful there. And then, yeah, things that have like a really long list of ingredients on their nutrition, and then not eating regular meals. So if you find that you're only eating 2 meals a day instead of 3 or 4 meals a day, the thing that you would do there is add the third meal and make it a real meal with an actual, balance of protein and carbohydrates, which are, depending on what you're eating, is going to have the right amount of fat content. But yeah, those are the 3 biggest things: drinking, snacks, and meals.
That last one is counterintuitive to most people, and I think might be one of the most important, if not the most important, because a lot of people have come to me and said, hey, how about I start intermittent fasting? Because then I'll just take, 500, 800, 1,000 calories for some people, depending on how big your breakfast is, out of the equation, right? But most people, and my personal experience as well, is that the net effect ends up not being very sustainable or contribute towards your goals, because typically what you end up doing in that case is removing one of the more stable sources of protein in people's diet, or at least a meal. Like the difference between a snack and a meal in my mind is how stable and how good of a quality is the protein source. You could call a snack a meal itself too. That meal could have a lot of protein in it, but conceptually, at least when I envision what a snack versus a meal looks like, it's really comes down to the protein. So what I notice is when people take the breakfast out, okay, yes, they've knocked that 500, 800 calories out, but then they'll hit the afternoon just starving, or they'll make up for it by snacking throughout the rest of the day. And it's counterintuitive because, and even for myself sometimes, when you feel uncomfortable in your body, there's this tendency to think that you need less. And having that full meal sometimes feels like you're eating a lot, especially if it's like a well-rounded meal. It's got a lot of protein, it's got a lot of fiber in it. Like it's gonna on the plate look like a lot of food. And sometimes I think psychologically that's hard to get over.
Yeah.
You need to do that 3, and for as a guy my size, I need to be doing that 4 times a day. And if I don't, I'm not going to get enough protein, and I'm probably going to have either inadequate calories or I'm going to overeat at some other point in the day with low quality calories.
Yeah. And I think that that's interesting. This just occurred to me. Like it can happen on just a short-term timeline of the day where it's almost yo-yoing, where it's eating a lot and then not eating very much. And I've seen that happen over like every other week with people, especially women, with differences in their hormonal cycles from week to week, where it's undereating, overeating, undereating, overeating. And then that can happen across like 3 months at a time, where it's undereating, doing a cut, maybe like an out of control cut, and then it's overeating in a bulk.
Right.
And so you can really change that like spikes and valleys with stabilizing across at least 3 meals. It makes a big difference.
You noticed that earlier this year across your week when you were tracking, right?
Yeah, for sure. Where it's like classic. I think I've seen this on Instagram many times, where it's like Monday through Friday, salad, water, salad, water, salad, water. Like Friday through Sunday night, pizza, ice cream.
Yeah.
So lots of power in stabilizing.
So you feel depleted and weak week long, thinking that you're moving towards your target. And I think that's when I did my kind of look back over the last couple of weeks. That's what I feel like I've been doing, is under eating protein and high quality calorie sources and overeating a bit on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So I was actually shocked. I got on the scale and I've been feeling, and my steps have been lower. that was another big one that I noticed, is that so my kind of baseline level of activity is a little bit lower. So I've been feeling really not good and expected to be way high on the scale, but it was about 8 pounds lower than I thought it was going to be.
Wow.
And so I was like, oh, actually what's been happening is I'm actually probably not eating enough.
Yeah.
I'm just not getting my normal levels of activity and sleep. And that's why everything feels heavy.
Yeah.
That's kind of a frustrating place to be.
But just by, I think, trying to get enough protein, that might be the minimum effective dose that's necessary, it sounds like.
I think certainly somebody my size and the average person is the first thing that I would do, because for two reasons. Protein's obviously very important for muscle protein synthesis, but then it has such a huge impact on your satiety that I think it has just such a cascade effect on everything else that you choose to eat. And usually if you are making an effort to get good quality protein, especially if you're not just pounding 8 protein shakes a day, but if you're trying to get lean meat in your food, or at least protein that's not super high fat, whatever your source is, it tends to require you to be more intentional about having a meal. Again, going back to that meal versus snack kind of idea. I think that going out of your way to make sure you have good quality protein tends to lend itself to having other good food with it.
So I would love to give people a minimum effective dose for conditioning. I've gotten that question. It seems to come along the time when people might start to also be feeling a little bit fluffy. But for someone who wants to add conditioning into their routine, I'm thinking, do we start with step count? Do we add zone 2 right away? Do we add high intensity intervals? What kind of questions do you use to dig out what the best option might be for a person at that given time?
I think the best place to start is having a good understanding of where somebody is and what their most recent history in terms of activity level is. If somebody is completely sedentary and has no background in conditioning,
And so they're lifting. Yeah.
lifting is really it, then I think step count is the best place to start.
Yeah.
That's the least intrusive across all aspects of training. It's not going to impact your workout.
Yeah.
You can put your shoes on. You don't even need special shoes to get your step count up.
Mhm.
You can start parking further from the grocery store. You know, you can
walk around your office.
walk around your office, just go around the block, you right out your front door. You don't need to go to a gym. You don't need a treadmill. Just do it. Just find ways to increase the number of steps. Take the stairs instead of the elevator. You know, all the different ways that you can increase your basic level of activity day to day, I think is definitely the lowest hanging fruit. I don't know that I would call that conditioning.
Yeah. But it kind of sets the foundation for what might come next.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to increase your activity level in a meaningful way that I think makes a big difference. I think somebody that goes from being sedentary to 5 to 10,000 steps a day is going to feel that.
Yes. And then you have already basically carved out a time in your schedule to add that in maybe on a different day. So if you're only walking 2,000 steps a day, which is probably someone who's not actively doing any other work would do. I mean, if you're just sitting at your computer and then you walk to the gym, then you're probably under 3,000, maybe 4,000. And then if you double that, you're intentionally creating additional time where you're being active, which 2 days a week, you can actually replace that with something with a higher heart rate. So that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
And then, do you think intervals or the fad of zone 2 for 40 minutes?
At that point, I think it comes down to personal preference. It's probably the next thing that I would check in on. The benefits of HIIT, I don't know if this is true or not, but it seems like people are more compliant with HIIT. And I think it's because it's faster. It feels like you're doing something really hard. So you get a little bit of a dopamine hit or something. Not that you can't get that from zone 2, but it's usually a little easier just from a skill perspective, which sounds funny to say, but cranking out a bunch of stuff on a air bike, for example, is probably about as low skill as you can get, even compared to going for a jog.
Yeah, a jog.
That can kind of beat people up, to Tell somebody who's
beats me up.
not in condition. Yeah, I mean, I just went for a jog and it did not feel very good at 250 pounds. But riding a bike, maybe you can get outside, but then you have to start trying to navigate like, okay, what's the route that I'm going to take?
Yeah.
Do I have a trail? Am I dodging traffic?
One of the first questions that I would ask is, what equipment do you have?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What do we have access to? Like maybe it is only going outside and getting their heart rate up.
True.
Unless they can get a spin bike or an air bike or rowing machine, jump rope maybe.
Yeah, I would probably lean towards, the one that seems to also be coming up a lot is the whole rucking thing, because then you can jack your heart rate up. If you can get a little bit of a hill and a pack on, then you can get into that zone 2 pretty reliably without, it's obviously not very high skill. That would probably be but yes, you're right. The equipment is really the driving factor.
Yeah.
But framed, whether it's HIIT versus the zone 2 low intensity steady state, I noticed that when I assign the low intensity steady state, it tends not to happen.
Yeah, you gotta really trick yourself into doing that. And like, I think it lasts for like 3 weeks.
You gotta, Well, and it just takes up a lot of time too, It
does. And like, you have to be like a little bit into it, but not super hard. So like, are you gonna read? Are you gonna watch something? Like, are you gonna listen to a book? And it's just like, there's too much. It's just like, it's like not enough.
How's the weather? Like as soon as the weather turns, that starts becoming usually harder for people to do.
Yeah.
Or they just get bored out of their skull if they're doing it inside.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. I like the intervals. And often I'll start people with an interval that's like 45 seconds, moderate to hard, and then like 30 to 45 seconds recovery. And then I just ratchet that up until it's eventually like a Tabata or like a 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off, where like they're more able to redline and more able to recover from it. And then you can like increase the number of rounds that they do each time. But yeah, I'm with you. Like doing that on a prowler or a bike, then you can be done with your conditioning in like 12 minutes and move on with your life.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the same framework that we use for lifting that applies for nutrition and conditioning as well, is that simple, hard, and effective is usually the best route to go because it's the one that you can actually get done consistently over a long period of time.
Yeah.
So I think getting back to the big overarching question that you started with is, what's the thing that you can do that's going to really move you in the right direction? It's probably the simple, hard, and effective thing that you can consistently do.
Right. Yeah. The C word. It doesn't matter if you're not going to be consistent with it.
Right.
It's just you chasing shiny new objects.
That's a hard message, I think, to give somebody who's really excited and has their list of 20 things they want to go do all at once.
Yeah.
Because there is that momentum and that energy that is enticing to capitalize on and say, I'm going to go completely change my life. But the problem, what I think is important to think through is, what are you going to do when that energy is gone? The whole discipline over motivation. Well, what do you do when you don't have discipline or motivation? Which is often the case, I think, for most people. I'm not going to pretend like I have a ton of discipline or motivation. I think it's that I've created enough friction where needed and removed enough friction where needed so that I'm really actually most of the time moving through the path of least resistance.
I love that. Yeah, totally. Low friction to get to the gym, to know what you're doing.
At the home gym.
Like you've got both of those things figured out. You have a coach who tells you what to do.
Got a coach who writes my program.
You have your lifting shoes. Like you got those things. High friction to miss. Like missing doesn't feel good. You have to tell your coach. You have to move your schedule around. You have to have that conversation. And then with nutrition, like not buying certain things, like creating friction where it's harder to get the things that don't serve you well.
Yeah, and I mean and these are things that have accumulated gradually over a long, years, decades at this point. I don't even feel like I can brag about working out because I don't feel good if I don't work out. So it's like saying, it almost feels like I'm hungover if I don't work out consistently. Well, so why would I brag about that? It's like I do the thing that doesn't make me feel sick and gross. Yeah, good job, Andrew. Like neat. I skip a day and I feel hungover, so I do the thing that doesn't make me feel hungover. So it's actually the thing that I do when I don't have discipline or motivation.
Amazing.
I have to be disciplined to not train now.
Yeah, it's hard to not train.
Be like, I am not training today.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like that. I have to be going on a really fun vacation, and then I'll think about it.
Yeah, and then even then you're like, well, but what if we
Maybe I'll just see what gyms are around.
what if we plan the entire vacation around the gyms?
What if we added another day? Because then we would have to train.
Exactly. So, I mean, maybe that sounds like a little bit of a humble brag, but I think that's the reality is like, you got to think about the things that you need to have in place for when you don't feel motivated. Otherwise, I think it's always going to revert back to what feels comfortable.
Cool. Thanks for those insights, Andrew. Appreciate it. And if you're going to take away anything, you don't have to do everything. Do something that you can do consistently. And by that, I mean for a good 4 months and then like 40 years after that.
Exactly.
That's all. Awesome. Well, if you would like to talk to one of the coaches at Barbell Logic, we'd love to have a conversation with you about your training, about your lifting. You can set something up at barbelllogic.com/experience, and be sure to take a look at our massive content library. Go to our website, barbelllogic.com, go to content. It's free. We have a bajillion videos, a lot of articles. We have a lot of really good stuff out there to keep you invested in your training and to know that you're on the right path. So go check it out. Thanks for listening.